The radar contact appeared at 3:47 hours, precisely when the North Atlantic should have been empty. NORAD's night shift controller leaned forward, watching the blip drift southwest at commercial speed, but the transponder code was wrong. Flight 1049, a transatlantic 777 bound for Boston, had gone silent mid-ocean. No distress call. No mayday. Just the automated beacon screaming into the void, and then a transmission that made the controller's blood freeze. Any military aircraft, this is civilian passenger Kestrel 7 actual requesting immediate intercept. Pilot incapacitated, I have the aircraft. The voice was female, calm, impossibly steady. Kestrel 7 actual. The controller's fingers hovered over the keyboard. That call sign belonged to a ghost. It had been retired 6 years ago after the Kandahar incident, after the congressional hearing, after the Air Force quietly forced out one of the most decorated A-10 pilots in recent memory. The woman who'd held the Taliban back for 9 hours over a besieged firebase, who'd made 11 gun runs on fumes and a damaged hydraulic system, who'd been blamed when the after-action report needed a scapegoat for the 16 casualties that would have been 200 without her. Captain Myra Voss, the controller, hit the alert button. 200 miles northeast, Captain Joel Hendricks was breathing recycled air in the cockpit of his F-22 Raptor, running a routine patrol that had been routine for 8 consecutive nights. His wingman, Lieutenant Ashley Park, flew silent formation off his right wing. They were 20 minutes from calling it when the encrypted channel crackled. Reaper 1-1, Reaper 1-2, this is Valor Control. We have a situation. Commercial flight with incapacitated crew, civilian attempting control. Intercepting to provide visual confirmation and escort. Vector 0905, Angels 30. You're looking for a 777 registration November 4 Tango X-ray. Hendricks acknowledged, rolled his aircraft east and pushed the throttle forward. Beside him, Park matched his movement perfectly. They climbed through 28,000 feet in silence, and then Valor Control added, almost hesitantly, Reaper flight, be advised. The civilian on the radio identified herself as Kestrel 7 actual. Park's transmission came through tight, confused. Valor, confirm Kestrel 7. There was a pause. Confirmed. Voss is aboard the aircraft. She's talking passengers through depressurization procedures. She has the yoke. Hendricks felt something shift in his chest. Myra Voss. He'd been a lieutenant when she'd been grounded, had watched the hearing from the back of the room, watched them tear apart her decisions while men who'd never flown combat nodded along. She'd walked out in silence, disappeared, and the squadron had quietly mourned losing the kind of pilot who made everyone else better just by existing. Now she was in a powerless cockpit over black water, holding 270 souls together with nothing but a headset and memory. Hendricks pushed his Raptor harder, cutting through the darkness. Reaper 1-2, go secure. Park switched frequencies. She saved my cousin at Kandahar, Park said quietly. He was one of the 16 who made it out. Hendricks didn't respond. He didn't need to. They both knew what this intercept meant. Below them, the ocean was invisible. Above, the stars were cold and infinite. And somewhere ahead, a woman who'd been erased from service records was flying on instincts the Air Force had tried to bury. The radar contact grew closer. Hendricks checked his weapon systems out of habit, then felt absurd. There was no enemy here, just a pilot in the worst kind of trouble, the kind where competence was the only weapon that mattered. Valor Control, Reaper 1-1, contact established. Visual in 30 seconds. He dropped altitude, and the 777 materialized against the faint horizon glow, a massive shadow struggling to hold course. The cockpit windows were dark. Only the running lights burned steady. Then the radio crackled again, and Myra Voss's voice cut through the static, steady as bedrock, addressing the passengers in a tone that somehow carried both command and comfort. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Myra. The good news is we have 2 Air Force fighters off our wing now. The bad news is I need you to stay exactly where you are. Hendricks eased his Raptor alongside the 777's port side, close enough to see into the cabin windows. Faces pressed against the glass, pale and terrified. He rocked his wings, the universal signal, I see you. You're not alone. The gesture felt inadequate. Then the encrypted channel opened and Myra's voice came through on the military frequency, direct and clear. Reaper Flight, Kestrel 7. Captain collapsed 14 minutes ago. First officer non-responsive, possible stroke. I've got engine power and hydraulics, but the autopilot disengaged and I can't get it back. Fuel state is adequate, but I need vectors to the nearest suitable runway with emergency equipment. And I need someone to talk me through the glass cockpit. Last time I flew something this big, it had analog gauges. Hendricks felt a strange pride flare in his chest, unexpected and fierce. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't grandstanding. She was doing what she'd always done, assessing, adapting, executing. Kestrel 7, Reaper 1-1, copy all, we're with you. Valor Control is pulling up airport options and getting you a 777 pilot on frequency. You're not alone up here. There was the briefest pause, and then Myra's voice came back, and for the first time there was a crack in the armor, just a hint of the weight she was carrying. Appreciated Reaper. It's been a while since I had a wingman. Park's voice cut in, firm and certain. You've got two now, ma'am. We're not going anywhere. Below, Valor Control was already moving mountains. Within 4 minutes, they'd pulled a senior 777 instructor pilot from his bed in Virginia, patched him through on a dedicated channel, and scrambled emergency equipment to 3 possible divert airfields. The instructor's name was Marcus Alade, a former Navy pilot with 12,000 hours on wide-bodies, and his first transmission was pure professional calm. Kestrel 7, this is Ironside Actual. I'm a 777 IP and I'm going to be your co-pilot for the next hour. First thing, I need to know what you're seeing on the primary flight display. Myra's response was immediate, precise. PFD shows airspeed 285 knots, altitude 30,000, heading 0903. Attitude indicator is level. Vertical speed indicator is showing plus 100 feet per minute. I'm trying to arrest that. Engine parameters are green across the board. Alade's voice carried relief. Outstanding. You've got the fundamentals. Now talk me through what happened to the autopilot. Captain grabbed his chest, slumped forward onto the yoke. Aircraft pitched down hard before I could pull him back. First officer tried to recover but went unresponsive 30 seconds later. I disengaged the autopilot manually to regain control, but when I tried to re-engage, nothing. Mode control panel is lit but non-responsive. Alade swore softly. Okay, that's a system fault from the upset. We're going to fly this one hands-on. You've got stick and rudder skills, that's what matters now. Hendricks listened to the exchange, maintaining his escort position. The 777 was wandering slightly and heading, small corrections visible in the aircraft's subtle movements. He could imagine Myra in that cockpit, hands on a yoke designed for 2 pilots, eyes scanning instruments she'd memorized from emergency cards she must have read 1,000 times during the flight, before everything went wrong. Park had moved to the starboard side, boxing the airliner in, giving Myra visual references. It was an instinctive formation, protective. Hendricks keyed his mic. Kestrel, Reaper 1-1, you're holding steady. Corrections are smooth. You're doing great. Thanks, Reaper. It's like flying a building that really wants to Dutch roll if I sneeze wrong. There was a hint of dark humor in her voice, the kind pilots used to keep fear at arm's length. Hendricks smiled despite himself. Copy that. We'll keep the turbulence away from you. Alade came back on frequency. Kestrel, Ironside, Valor Control is recommending Gander International. Runway 10-3, 13,000 feet, full emergency response available. It's 1 hour 10 minutes at current speed and heading. I'm going to give you a turn to heading 305, very gentle, standard rate. On my mark, roll left 5 degrees of bank and we'll let it come around. Ready? Ready. Mark. Hendricks watched the 777's wings dip almost imperceptibly to the left, the massive aircraft beginning its turn with surprising grace. Myra's corrections were small, disciplined. She wasn't over-controlling, wasn't fighting the airplane. She was listening to it, feeling it, flying it the way only someone with thousands of hours of muscle memory could. The turn took 90 seconds, and when the aircraft rolled wings level on the new heading, Alade's voice carried genuine respect. Textbook, Kestrel, you've done this before. Long time ago, different airplane, same basic physics. Best kind of flying. Now let's talk fuel management and descent planning. You're going to be hands-on for the approach and I need you sharp. Tell me about the passengers. Hendricks understood the question. Alid was checking her mental state, making sure she wasn't so focused on flying that she'd forgotten the human stakes. Myra's answer was steady, but there was steel underneath. 273 souls, 18 kids under 10, 1 infant, 3 passengers with medical training helping keep the pilots stable. Cabin crew has been exceptional. Flight attendant named Grace coordinated everything without being asked. I've got people staying calm because they trust I know what I'm doing. I will not let them down. The words hung in the air. Hendricks heard the vow in them, the absolute refusal to fail. It was the same tone she'd used over Kandahar, when she'd told the firebase commander she'd stay on station until she ran dry, consequences be damned. Park's voice was quiet on the secure channel. She's going to bring them home, Joel. I know, Hendricks said, but knowing and seeing were different things, and he was suddenly aware that he was witnessing something rare. A pilot in extremis, operating beyond the edge of training, holding everything together through sheer force of will and skill. The kind of moment that defined careers or ended them. The North Atlantic stretched endlessly below, black and indifferent. Hendricks checked his fuel state. 60%. Enough to stay with her all the way to Gander if needed. He wasn't leaving, Park wouldn't either. Behind them, Valor Control was coordinating with Canadian authorities, with FAA officials, with airline executives. The story was already leaking. Social media was lighting up. Flight 1049, the pilot who fainted, the mysterious passenger flying the plane, and slowly, inevitably, the name, Myra Voss, Kestrel 7 Actual, the pilot they'd forced out. The woman who'd been blamed for doing everything right when everything went wrong. Hendricks thought about the hearing, about the closed-door decisions, about the quiet injustice of a system that protected itself by sacrificing its best. And he thought about Myra, alone in that cockpit, proving what everyone who'd flown with her already knew. She was exactly the pilot you wanted when the impossible became mandatory. Alid's voice brought him back. Kestrel Ironside, let's start working through the descent checklist. You're going to begin letting down in 20 minutes. I need you to find the pressurization panel, make sure it's in auto mode. If it's not, we'll talk through manual control. Copy, checking now. There was a pause. Hendricks imagined her leaning forward, scanning the overhead panel, finding the right switches among hundreds. Pressurization is in auto. Cabin altitude showing 8,000 feet. Good. Leave it there. Now when we start down, the aircraft is going to want to accelerate. You'll need to use the speed brakes if you get above 290 knots. Speed brake lever is on the center pedestal just aft of the throttles. Yellow and black handle. Located. Outstanding. You're ahead of the aircraft, Kestrel. That's exactly where you need to be. The next 40 minutes unfolded in a rhythm of small victories. Myra coordinated with the cabin crew, ensuring passengers were briefed on the emergency landing. She worked through Alid's methodical checklist, configuring the aircraft for descent. She listened to weather updates for Gander, acknowledged the emergency equipment being staged. And through it all, her voice never wavered, never showed the crushing pressure she had to be feeling. Hendricks marveled at it. This was someone who'd been discarded, told she wasn't good enough, forced into obscurity. And here she was, holding 273 lives together with nothing but competence and calm. At 32 minutes from Gander, Alid's tone shifted, becoming more focused. Kestrel Ironside, time to talk approach and landing. This is going to be the hard part. I need you listening closely and I need you to trust yourself. You have the skills. We're just going to apply them to a bigger machine. Copy. Copy, I'm ready. Good. Gander is expecting winds 270 at 15, gusting 22. Runway 103 is directly into the wind. You'll be flying a visual approach with ILS guidance. I'm going to talk you through the setup and then we'll take it 1 mile at a time. The 777 lands itself if you respect its energy management. Speed, attitude, power, same fundamentals as anything else you've ever flown. You track the glide slope, manage your speed and let it settle. Flare is minimal. You're looking for a firm touchdown, not a greaser. Firm is safe. You understand? Understood. Firm is safe. Hendricks listened to the exchange and felt tension coil in his gut. Landing a 777 manually at night with no autopilot and no experienced crew was an edge-of-capability maneuver. The margin for error was razor-thin. Too fast and she'd float, burning runway. Too slow and the aircraft would drop like a stone. Too much flare and she'd tail strike. Not enough and she'd slam the nose gear. Any one of a dozen mistakes could turn this into catastrophe. But Myra had landed an A-10 with battle damage, with hydraulics failing, with warning lights screaming. She'd brought jets home that should have been written off. If anyone could do this, it was her. Valor Control's voice cut through his thoughts. Reaper Flight, Kestrel 7. Be advised, Gander has closed all runways except 103. Emergency equipment is in place. CFR is standing by. Kestrel 7, you are cleared for the approach, landing runway 103, winds 270 at 15 gusting 22. You are number 1, no delays. Myra's acknowledgement was crisp. Kestrel 7 cleared approach runway 103. Hendricks keyed his mic. Kestrel, Reaper 11, we're going to escort you down to minimums, then break off so we don't clutter your sight picture. You've got this. Appreciated, Reaper. See you on the ground. The 777 began its descent, nose dropping gently as Myra pulled the throttles back and extended the speed brakes. Hendricks and Park matched her descent, maintaining position. The clouds below were scattered, and through the gaps the lights of Newfoundland began to appear, tiny and cold against the black landscape. Alaid's voice was a constant presence now, calling out altitudes, speeds, configurations. Passing flight level 250. Speed is on target. Let's get the gear down. Gear lever is on your right, forward of the throttles. Gear down. A pause. 3 green. Perfect. Feel that drag, that's normal. Add a little power, keep your speed up. You're looking for 190 knots until we configure further. Hendricks descended through 15,000 feet, watching the 777 grow larger in his canopy as his own aircraft's descent rate increased. The commercial jet was stable, wings level, tracking inbound perfectly. Myra was flying with precision that seemed almost mechanical, but Hendricks knew better. This was artistry disguised as procedure. Passing 10,000, speed 195, slightly fast, bring it back just a touch. Reducing. Good, now flaps 5. Flaps 5. Hendricks could hear the focus in her voice, the total absorption. She was inside the machine now, merged with it, feeling every control input, every response. This was what separated pilots who flew from pilots who were artists. Myra wasn't operating the 777, she was dancing with it. At 5,000 feet, Hendricks could see Gander's approach lights, a string of brilliant white stretching into the darkness. The runway beyond was a ribbon of light. Emergency vehicles clustered on the taxiways, their red and white strobes painting the scene in urgency. Kestrel, Reaper Flight is breaking off. Bring her home. Thanks for the escort, Reaper. Hendricks pulled his Raptor into a climbing left turn, Park following. They climbed to pattern altitude and circled, watching. Inside the 777, Myra was alone with Alaid's voice and the instruments. Her hands were steady on the yoke, her feet light on the rudder pedals. The glide slope indicator showed her centered, descending at 700 feet per minute. Perfect. Too perfect, a small voice whispered. Don't trust it. She scanned the instruments again, cross-checking. Airspeed 160, altitude 3,000, rate of descent steady. Localizer centered. She was threaded through the needle. Flaps 15. Flaps 15, speed 150. Good. Now at 2,000 feet I want flaps 25. That's going to slow you to 140 knots and you'll feel the nose want to drop. Add power to maintain glide slope. This is where a lot of pilots get behind the aircraft. Stay ahead of it. Copy. The runway was growing now, expanding from a line to a distinct shape. Myra could see the threshold, the painted numbers. 103. She'd landed on shorter runways, in worse conditions, in aircraft that were actively dying. But never with this many people depending on her. Never with this much weight on her shoulders. 2,000 feet, flaps 25. Flaps 25. The nose dropped. Myra added power, felt the engines respond. The 777 settled back onto the glide slope. Alaid's voice was calm, paternal. Beautiful, Kestrel, you're flying like you've done this 1,000 times. Feels like the first. That's good. Means you're respecting it. 1,000 feet. Flaps 30, full landing configuration. Speed 135, then let it decelerate to 130 over the threshold. Flaps 30. The runway rushed up. Myra's world narrowed to the sight picture, the angle, the speed. She'd done this before in simulators during her airline interviews years ago, back when she'd thought about civilian flying after the military. The memory was distant but clear. Threshold coming up, 500 feet. The automated voice in the cockpit announced minimums, then altitude callouts. 100, 50, 40, 30. Myra eased the throttles to idle, began the flare. The 777 floated, hanging in ground effect. She held it off, let the speed bleed, felt the main gear touch down with a solid thump. Firm. Safe. She deployed the spoilers, brought the nose down, and reached for the reverse thrust levers. The engines roared. The aircraft decelerated hard. Myra stood on the brakes as they passed midfield, the runway vanishing behind them. 60 knots, 40, 20. The 777 rolled to a stop 3,000 feet from the far end of the runway, surrounded by flashing lights and emergency vehicles. Myra sat back, her hands shaking for the first time. Oleg's voice came through, thick with emotion. Kestrel 7, that was perfect. Welcome to Gander. The cabin erupted, applause, shouting, crying. Myra keyed the PA with trembling fingers. Ladies and gentlemen, we're on the ground. Emergency personnel will be boarding shortly to assist the pilots. Please remain seated. She released the mic and closed her eyes. Grace, the flight attendant, appeared in the cockpit doorway. Her face was streaked with tears. You saved us, she said. Myra shook her head. We saved each other. Outside, fire trucks surrounded the aircraft, their crews ready for disaster that hadn't come. Paramedics boarded and moved to the cockpit, beginning treatment on the incapacitated pilots. Both were alive, stable. Myra stood on shaking legs, letting the professionals take over. She walked back through the cabin and passengers reached out, touching her shoulders, her hands, whispering thanks. A little girl, maybe 6, looked up at her with wide eyes. Are you a superhero? Myra knelt down, managed a smile. No, sweetheart, just a pilot. Outside, Hendricks landed his Raptor at Gander, taxiing to the military ramp. Park followed. They climbed out, still in flight suits, and watched the 777 in the distance, surrounded by lights. Hendricks felt something shift in his chest, something like vindication. Myra Voss had just reminded the world what the Air Force had tried to forget. Some pilots were irreplaceable. The debriefing took place in Gander's cramped airport operations center at 6:30 hours. After the passengers had been evacuated, the pilots transported to hospital, and the aircraft secured. Myra sat across from a panel of officials, Transport Canada investigators, FAA representatives, airline executives, and 2 Air Force officers who'd arrived on a priority flight from Langley. She was exhausted, running on adrenaline fumes and bad coffee. The lead investigator, a severe woman named Pelletier, opened the questioning. Ms. Voss, walk us through your decision-making process when the captain became incapacitated. Myra recounted it methodically. The captain's collapse, her assessment, the decision to take control. She was precise, unemotional. When she mentioned her call sign, one of the Air Force officers, a colonel named Briggs, someone she vaguely recognized from her active duty days, leaned forward. Captain Voss, you identified yourself as Kestrel 7 Actual. That call sign was retired. Old habits, Colonel. In an emergency, I reverted to what felt natural. Briggs studied her. You've been out of the cockpit for 6 years. No recent flight time on commercial aircraft. What made you think you were qualified to take control of a 777? The question hung in the air, loaded with implication. Myra met his gaze steadily. With respect, Colonel, I wasn't thinking about qualifications. I was thinking about 273 people who would die if someone didn't act. The room was silent. Then the airline's chief pilot, a graying man named Torrens, spoke. Ms. Voss, I've reviewed the cockpit voice recorder. Your performance was exemplary. You made decisions that saved lives. On behalf of the airline, I want to thank you. Pelletier nodded. Preliminary findings show you acted appropriately given the circumstances. There will be a full investigation, but you're not under any scrutiny here. Briggs said nothing. His expression was unreadable. The debriefing ended an hour later. Myra walked out into the terminal, where passengers from Flight 1049 were being rebooked on outbound flights. Many recognized her, approached her with tearful gratitude. She accepted it with quiet grace, deflecting praise, insisting the crew and the air traffic controllers deserved credit. But she saw the way they looked at her, like she was something more than human. It made her uncomfortable. She slipped outside to the tarmac, needing air. Hendricks found her there, standing alone near a hangar, staring at the horizon. "Captain Voss," she turned, saw the flight suit, the Raptor patch. Recognition flickered. "You're the escort pilot, Reaper 11. "Joel Hendricks, ma'am, and that's my wingman, Ashley Park." Park had followed him out, hands in her pockets. "We wanted to meet you in person." Myra nodded slowly. "Thanks for sticking with me up there, made it less lonely." Hendricks hesitated, then said, "I was at your hearing 6 years ago, back row. I was a lieutenant." Myra's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "Long time ago." "They were wrong," Hendricks said quietly. "What they did to you, everyone knew it, we just couldn't say it." Park stepped forward. "My cousin was at that fire base, Lance Corporal Diaz. You kept the Taliban off them for 9 hours. He's alive because of you." Myra looked away. 16 didn't make it. 200 would have died without you," Park said. "That hearing was about politics, not performance. Everyone who flew with you knew it." The words seemed to hit Myra harder than anything in the debriefing. She closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them they were bright with something Hendricks couldn't quite name. Grief, maybe, or relief. "I appreciate that," she said softly. They stood in silence, 3 pilots who understood the weight of decisions made in seconds, the burden of survival, the injustice of being judged by people who'd never felt their hands shake after bringing a broken machine home. Finally, Hendricks extended his hand. "It was an honor to fly with you, Captain." Myra shook it, then Parks. "The honor was mine." They left her there, heading back to their Raptors for the flight back to Langley. As they walked, Park said, "Think they'll bring her back?" Hendricks shook his head. "I don't know, but after today they'd be fools not to." The story spread like wildfire. By noon, Flight 1049 was trending worldwide. The cockpit voice recording was leaked, heavily redacted but still powerful. News outlets ran stories about the mysterious passenger who'd saved 273 lives. Myra's identity was confirmed within hours, and then the deeper story emerged. The A-10 pilot, the Kandahar mission, the controversial hearing, the forced resignation. The narrative shifted. What had been framed as a failure 6 years ago was being reassessed. Commentators questioned the Air Force's decision. Veterans spoke out. The 16 casualties were placed in context of the 200 who'd survived. Details emerged that had been buried. The malfunctioning close air support coordination, the lack of artillery support, the intelligence failures that had led to the firebase being overrun in the first place. Myra had been the scapegoat for a systemic failure, and now, in the glaring light of her competence under impossible circumstances, the injustice was impossible to ignore. Within 72 hours, 3 senators called for a review of her case. Myra watched it unfold from a hotel room in Gander, feeling surreal and detached. She'd given one interview to a local reporter who'd been respectful and straightforward, and then she declined all others. She didn't want to be a symbol. She didn't want vindication through media spectacle. She just wanted to go home, back to her quiet life, back to the anonymity she'd built. But on the 4th day, there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find Colonel Briggs out of uniform, looking uncomfortable. "Captain Voss, may I come in?" She stepped aside. He entered, glanced around the modest room, then turned to face her. "I owe you an apology. I was part of the board that recommended your separation. I reviewed the case files again over the past few days. We were wrong. The decision was influenced by political pressure and we failed you. I failed you." Myra stared at him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know. And because the Air Force needs pilots like you. We always have." He reached into his jacket, pulled out an envelope. "This is an official letter from the Chief of Staff. It's an invitation to return to active duty with full reinstatement of rank and benefits. You'd be assigned to a test pilot program at Edwards, working on next-generation close air support platforms. Myra took the envelope but didn't open it. I've been out for 6 years. You just landed a 777 with no co-pilot and no autopilot. You haven't lost a thing that matters. She looked down at the envelope. Inside was everything she'd lost: the uniform, the call sign, the respect, the purpose. But she also thought about the 6 years she'd spent rebuilding herself, finding peace in a life that didn't involve violence and adrenaline and impossible choices. I need time, she said. Briggs nodded. Take all the time you need. But know this, what you did wasn't just about flying. You reminded people what leadership looks like. The Air Force needs that. The people you train need that. He left without waiting for a response. Myra sat on the bed, holding the envelope, feeling the weight of a decision she wasn't ready to make. Outside, the sun was setting over Gander, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The same sky she'd flown through, the same sky that had nearly claimed 273 lives. The sky that had always been her home. She thought about the little girl who'd asked if she was a superhero. The answer was still no. But maybe, just maybe, she was the kind of pilot who could teach others to be. 3 weeks later, Myra stood outside the gates of Edwards Air Force Base, wearing a civilian jacket over a newly issued flight suit. The uniform felt strange and familiar at once, like a memory made flesh. She'd spent the week since Gander wrestling with the decision, talking to veterans, to therapists, to the families of the 16 who died at Kandahar. Some conversations had been painful. One mother had told her through tears that she didn't blame Myra, that she was grateful her son had died fighting rather than being overrun. The absolution had been almost unbearable, but it had also been necessary. Myra couldn't carry that guilt into a cockpit again. She had to lay it down or it would kill her. The gate guard checked her ID, waved her through. Inside, the base was bustling, a mix of legacy aircraft and experimental designs. She reported to the test pilot wing headquarters, where she was met by a lieutenant colonel named Reeves, a woman with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. "Captain Voss, welcome back. We're honored to have you." "Thank you, ma'am. Let me be direct. You're here because you're one of the best close air support pilots this Air Force has ever produced, and because we need someone who can evaluate systems under the kind of pressure that breaks most people. You've proven you can do both. Your first assignment is evaluating a modified A-10 upgrade package. After that, we'll see where your skills fit best." Myra nodded. This was real. She was back. Reeves led her to a hangar, and there, gleaming under fluorescent lights, was an A-10 Thunderbolt II. The paint was fresh, the lines sharp, but it was unmistakably the Warthog, the tank killer, the infantryman's guardian angel. Myra felt something unlock in her chest. "She's yours," Reeves said. "Your call sign is active again. Kestrel 7 Actual, welcome home." Myra walked toward the aircraft, running her hand along the fuselage. The metal was cool under her fingers. She climbed the ladder, settled into the cockpit, and for the first time in 6 years, everything felt right. The instruments were exactly where they should be. The stick fit her hand perfectly. The view through the canopy was the world she'd been born to see. She closed her eyes and breathed. This was home. Not the Air Force, not the base, not the institution. The cockpit, the sky, the work. That evening she found herself in the officers' club, nursing a ginger ale when Hendricks and Park walked in. They spotted her, approached with grins. "Heard you were back," Hendricks said. "Couldn't stay away." "Something like that." Park raised her glass. "To Kestrel 7, the pilot who reminded us what this job is really about." They toasted. Myra felt the warmth of camaraderie, the sense of belonging she'd thought she'd lost forever. They talked for hours, trading stories, dissecting tactics, laughing at shared absurdities of military life. And slowly Myra realized that she hadn't just returned to the Air Force. She'd returned to herself. The weeks turned into months. Myra flew test missions, evaluated upgrades, pushed aircraft to their limits. Her reports were precise, unflinching, brilliant. She became a fixture at Edwards, respected by pilots half her age, sought out for advice and mentorship. She trained younger pilots in the art of close air support, teaching them not just the mechanics but the mindset. Stay calm, trust your training, never abandon the people depending on you. One afternoon, she was pulling off her helmet after a grueling test flight when Reeves approached. "Voss, got a minute?" "Yes, ma'am. There's a congressional delegation visiting tomorrow. They want to meet you." Something about revisiting the Kandahar incident, issuing a formal commendation. "I told them you'd probably tell them to shove it, but I thought I'd ask." Myra smiled faintly. "I'll meet them." The delegation arrived the next day, a trio of senators and their aides. They sat in a conference room, and Myra answered their questions with the same precision she brought to flying. When they asked if she felt vindicated, she paused, choosing her words carefully. "Vindication isn't what I needed, understanding is. What happened at Kandahar was a systemic failure, not an individual one. I hope the lessons from that day are being applied so that no other pilot is put in that position." One senator, a former Marine, nodded slowly. "Captain, we're recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross, retroactive to the Kandahar engagement. It's long overdue." Myra felt a lump in her throat. "Thank you, but if you really want to honor what happened, make sure the next generation of pilots has the support and resources I didn't. That's worth more than any medal." They left, and Myra walked out onto the flight line where her A-10 waited. The sun was setting, painting the desert sky in shades of fire. She thought about the passengers on Flight 1049, about the soldiers at Kandahar, about every person who'd ever depended on her to do the impossible. And she thought about the sky, vast and indifferent and beautiful, the place where all her doubts disappeared and everything made sense. This was her legacy. Not the headlines, not the medals, but the lives saved, the pilots trained, the example set. Kestrel 7 Actual, the pilot who came back.